Good evening from Vancouver and a warm welcome to the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada webinar on the geopolitics of South Asia and the Indo-Pacific. My name is Veena Najibullah. I'm the Vice President of Research and Strategy at the Asia Pacific Foundation. And my guests today are Dr. Indo Saxena and Dr. Stephen Nagy. They are the co-authors of an edited volume titled South Asia and the Indo-Pacific Construct. Dr. Stephen Nagy, or Stephen, is a professor at the International Christian University in Tokyo, and he's joining us bright and early from Tokyo. He's also a senior fellow at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada and has a number of other affiliations with institutions in Canada and Asia. He's currently working on middle power approaches to great power competition in the Indo-Pacific and Canadian foreign policy in the Indo-Pacific and the Sino-Japanese relations. Dr. Indo Saxena is a geopolitical and security analyst specializing in international relations and international security. She's a chief operations officer and a senior fellow at the Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers, a think tank that is based in New Jersey. So she's joining us late in the evening for her, which focuses on Indo-Pacific security research, specifically on South and Southeast Asia. Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're talking about the book that they've just launched, which looks specifically at Southeast Asia in Indo-Pacific, the geopolitical significance of the region, how specific countries are looking at US-China competition, and really what is the view from these countries. Maybe I'll begin with you, Indo, to give us a little bit of background. Why this book? Why now? Who are the authors? Kind of how did you decide what to include, what not to include in your edited volume?
Thanks, Veena, for your kind introduction. And first, let me start expressing my gratitude to the Asia Pacific Foundation for organizing the event and appreciate the opportunity to talk about our newly published volume, Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific Construct. Actually, we started this project in 2021, and the idea came following the various discussions of US Indo-Pacific strategy and the regional dynamics at the Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers. We held the numerous discussion, inviting the regional experts and the senior researchers at our platform. And the discussion aimed to explore the ways to examine the involvement of Southeast Asian countries in the Indo-Pacific. And finally, we got an opportunity to showcase the diverse regional perspective in a comprehensive volume. And here we are. And just would like to mention that we are lucky enough to find the senior experts from the fields. And personally, sometimes I feel that when you are working and you found someone who knows the region very well, and witnessing day to day what is happening in the region, and have the deep understanding that can bring that perspective in front of our audience, our researchers and students, and of course the local context. What I think that we can't think about, or like sitting in the New York or sitting in the Washington, maybe we have the different perspective, and that the local and native insights that hugely benefited this project. So after in the last, when in my remarks, I would like to mention the names of our contributors, and thanks to the NOAA publishers, New York, their continued support and the cooperation to bringing this volume, esteemed specialist for writing the blurb, and of course, Professor Yoichiro Sato for writing the foreword from the Asia Pacific University, Japan. So why this volume? As we know, the book, let me tell you very briefly, the book centers the response of Southeast Asian countries to the US-led Indo-Pacific and their foreign policy behavior, but the US and China intense competition is as well as that is going on in the region. And what the strategy they are adopting to deal with this intense competition. And if we say that the former Indo-Pac commander, Thomas Ackpinalo, said that in 2027, it will be the whether maybe it's a conflict in the Indo-Pacific or whatever he predicted that at that time. So why the Southeast Asia? It's a pivotal in the Indo-Pacific, like the other regions of the Pacific Islands and the South Asian regions. It's a crucial due to its emerging economies, and the some parts are the greatly highly contested, like the we have been watching in the news the second Thomas Shoal in the West Philippines, and the situation is fragile. And but again, these countries want their economic prosperity, growth, and we know that starting in 2013, China has hugely invested through the BRI in these countries. And now, what's they these countries are adapting this geopolitical environment. At the same time, they are finding to way the navigate these competitions while following the approach of strategic autonomy, or if you can say independent foreign policy, and or a multi-engagement. And therefore, the Southeast Asian countries adopted their own ASEAN outlook of free and open Indo-Pacific, AOIP, in 2019. And though it's already, whatever is the US Indo-Pacific strategy mentions the free and open Indo-Pacific, aligning with that, adding some regional and local context in the AOIP. So these countries want to maintain the good relation, ensuring their economic prosperity, uh, as they know they have the long-term reliable US partner, US as an offshore partner, but also have a powerful China in their neighborhood. So I will take this in the later part, why I'm saying that it's a reliable and credible long-term partner as US. So uh, again, these countries want to navigating a balancing act and navigating this geopolitical competition with a balancing act. Simultaneously, they don't want to support the Chinese dream, what is called the Chinese global order. And with this, they support the safeguard of territorial integrity and sovereignty, what is mentioned in the US Indo-Pacific strategy and the AOIP, the rule-based order, freedom of navigation, prosperity, and inclusivity, and with that ASEAN centrality. So while China is heavily invested in this, and they are benefited with China's BRI strategy, no doubt. But again, we have seen, and these countries also saw the repercussion of that huge investment by China. Like we saw and of course the countries and their leaders have seen the Sri Lankan case. So like the debt trap is we quote and unquote if we say uh, so but they are very cautious, and that's taking their step. But what we were discussing in starting in 2021, there is a little bit different scenario at the 2024. The US approach of with this Indo-Pacific strategy, and US is pushing it hard in the investment through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework that was launched in May 2022, and elevated its relationship with the Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia at the comprehensive strategic partnership. Uh, Also the Vietnam, but again, the Vietnam is the balancing, taking the balancing act. And maybe, of course, Vietnam has a border with China. And the other case is that is a very extraordinary step. That is the Philippines. And maybe we can talk about
Maybe we
that.
can get into that in a bit,
Yeah,
but thank you
yeah.
so much for that overview and for stressing the fact that you really wanted to focus on the voices from
Mhm.
the region, and that we often obviously hear about Indo-Pacific as a construct that US and its allies are now looking through, but that the voices from the region might have a different perspective. I think that that's a really valuable thing to add. And maybe, Stephen, if I could come to you to give kind of high-level findings or messages from the volume. What are the things that you would want people to walk away if they don't read every chapter in this really significant volume?
So great, Vina, and thank you again for hosting us today for the Asia Pacific Foundation's interest in this volume. And let me just say thanks to my co-editor, I think, who did a lion's share of the work on this book, and I really express my thanks to her. So in terms of three takeaways, I think that one is, of course, the region's very heterogeneous. Two, the incredible importance of reading the tea leaves of the region, and I'm going to come back to this. And then lastly, this idea of strategic autonomy. So in terms of heterogeneity, the region is so diverse, and we have the Philippines that is willing to engage in a minilateral relationship. We have an ultra-developed Singapore. Vietnam is a socialist state that has a complex but sometimes synergistic relationship with China. This all creates real complexity in terms of how we think about the region, how they're thinking about their economic prosperity and economic security, how they're thinking about their security in general, and how they think about their alignments. So that's a key, I think, for us to be thinking about. Second is this idea of reading the tea leaves of the region. You know, high-level speeches by prime ministers often say we don't want to choose between the United States and China. But I think there's a lot of great data out there. For example, the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies survey on South Asia, or the Asian China survey that comes out annually, that tell a different story. In these anonymous surveys, what we see is there's concern about encroaching Chinese hegemony within the region. What does it mean if China dominates the region for this region's autonomy and independence? What kind of rules will be imposed in the region? How Southeast Asian countries actually welcome initiatives like the Quad and AUKUS for the public good provision that the Quad does provide, or the deterrence effect that the AUKUS provides within the region. Even the countries that have the most, I guess, complex relationship with China, like Vietnam, look at these initiatives quietly and anonymously with more support. So I think that's a really important way to be thinking about, again, this reading the tea leaves. And then lastly, I think is the diplomatic actions that we see in the region. And this is actually, for me, the most fascinating way to read the tea leaves of Southeast Asia. So we look at a country like Vietnam, and Vietnam has actively courted or worked with the United States over the past few years. They've hosted Mr. Biden, the vice president. They've set up a Center of Disease Control in Hanoi. They had welcomed U.S. ships to Cam Bay, at least for a visit. They welcomed the Japanese for their visits and their investments. They welcomed the EU. And then in January, they welcome President Xi. And I think what we can understand is that these countries, again, are trying to secure the strategic autonomy by tilting to the West, but at the same time, not tilting away from China. And I think this is a pattern that we should be watching throughout the region. The Philippines as well, they're working in minilateral relationships with Australia, Japan, the United States. Singapore, Thailand, they work through the COBRA exercises to engage in security relationships, at the same time strengthening their economic partnerships. So again, the diplomacy that we see is that they are engaging with the United States, but also extra regional powers to pull them into the region so that they can balance the power and size of China. So I guess the last point is the strategic autonomy, and this is all related to my previous points, is that these countries want strategic autonomy. They want to be able to choose between their independent foreign policy within the region. They want to maintain independence of decision-making on economic security, on trade, on who their security partnerships are, but at the same time, they understand that China's not going away. Their economic prosperity and economic security is going to be related to the Chinese market, and they must engage proactively but from a position where they've balanced Chinese asymmetric size differences rather than compete directly with that size difference.
That's great. Thank you so much, Stephen. So the top kind of messages around the complexity of the region, the heterogeneity of the region, that often when we kind of speak of Southeast Asia, we say ASEAN, and we imagine that there is some kind of a consensus or conformity views, which is not the case. And there's quite a bit of variety between, let's say, Philippines on one end and Laos or Cambodia on the other end. I wondered if I could stay with you and if you could speak a little bit to the whole issue of engagement through ASEAN versus bilateral and minilateral, the various structures are now emerging in the region and how the region is positioning, sort of to go to your point around diplomacy and seeking strategic autonomy, and kind of what's the layout of the various instruments and arrangements like minilateral, multilateral, and how are different partners engaging through them?
So I'm familiar with the Japanese case and the Australian case and the Canadian case. And I think that it's important, the important message for us Canadians is that we don't have to choose. We should be doing all. So the multilateral side is we engage with ASEAN, perhaps we try to engage and find a role within the Asian Defense Ministers meeting, and we maybe position ourselves to try at least be at the table in terms of how security issues are discussed within the region. Whether that's feasible or not, that's going to take a little bit of time in terms of how Canada establishes its credibility within the region, but that's one way. On environmental cooperation, again, ASEAN is probably the better vehicle to engage in cooperation within the region. And Japan and Australia are quite good at this. But when we pivot down to the minilateral relationship, this is where I think we see a really distinguishing way to engage with the region from Australia and Japan. They have various minilateral partnerships that are engaged through the region and with the region. So let me give you an example. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue with the United States, India, Australia, and Japan provides public goods, provides some maritime security, provides some maritime domain awareness, and it bridges the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. Then we've had the recent meeting in Washington between Prime Minister Kishida, President Biden, and President Marcos, who decided to establish a maritime cooperation initiative that deals with maritime security, but also helping build infrastructure and technology. So this is another minilateral partnership. And of course, Australia is doing similar things. So they have a multilateral partnership, but they also have these minilateral partnerships that work within the region, across the region. And then lastly is this bilateral relationship. They're engaged with selective partners at a very high and intense, and sustained and deep level. So I was just in Vietnam, and you could see the FDI and the ODA being deployed throughout Vietnam, helping build subways, helping build harbors, helping build railways. And you see countries like Japan building intra-ASEAN infrastructure to strengthen intra-ASEAN regional integration. And the logic is that the more integrated ASEAN is economically, the more economically autonomous it can be. And that means it's not so reliant on outside actors. So these are some really just simple examples, I think, where we don't have to pick and choose. We engage through the multilateral mechanism through ASEAN. We engage through minilateral mechanisms, and then the bilateral engagement with, I think, key partners that are more stable, that match Canada's comparative advantages, and that we've established relationships. Once we have that sustainability, then we can bridge out to other of the Southeast Asian countries to start to do the same there.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Indo, in your opening remarks, you mentioned that the region doesn't want to necessarily take side, that obviously there's a lot of worry about Chinese hegemony or the possibility of kind of assertiveness and escalation of tensions in South China Sea, China Sea. Can you speak a little bit in terms of the specifics? So I know you looked at Malaysia, you looked at Philippines. Maybe if you could give us a little bit more of a granular analysis of their feelings and approaches to managing the security dynamics in the region and the emerging minilaterals that Stephen mentioned, particularly the Quad, AUKUS, and other, and now the new Squad with Philippines in it. What's the view of others, particularly with respect to Philippines and what's happening in South China Sea?
Yeah, like we did the last webinar on this China and on the trilateral, the first ever trilateral summit between the U.S. and Japan and Philippines, and that we call it the maybe some articles have been written on the squad, quote unquote, quad to squad. So maybe that's and what my analysis is there that is say in the unilateral emerging unilateralism, because when we see at the Quad, it's a non-military component there, and frankly, it's about due to the India, because India's historically non-alignment policy, but again, and now there's proactive engagement or the multi-engagement, but again, despite the U.S. Prominent partner in the Quad, India's relation with Russia, that is kind of India is also balancing with these superpowers. And then when we talk about this so called like it's said that Pentagon officials, as they are just sneakily said, this is squared. And when we talk about it's a prioritize Philippines. Because whatever the whatever we think that in this scenario, being a part, being an ally or a partnership, the security partnership, because that's not something that is a security alliance, but it's a partnership, is not only engaged with the United States, but also it's a comes with the big picture or with the allies of the US allies, like if they are in the European allies or the North American, like the Canada and so on and so on. So what I was talking about the Philippines significant step with this first ever trilateral summit is that what was the joint statement was there, Philippines with these three leaders, and they were just condemning the Ukraine, and because Japan and the US, they are the allied partners, and but the Philippines are also included in this. So it's very important and very tremendous positive steps from the ASEAN countries, and then we have to see that how the other countries take the path. But again, I'm pretty sure that the other countries, the Indonesia, again the balancing following the balancing act or the neutral approach, or not picking the sides. But when in the previous President Joko Widodo, that like that was more a kind of U.S. engagement, that he elevated the U.S.-Indonesia partnership at the comprehensive strategic partnership. But now the new Indonesian President Prabowo, like because now it has to see like it's a how it takes the next step, or because like he visited China first, again in his while taking the office, and then Japan. So maybe again it's a balancing act that the Indonesia also following, but the huge investment in the to the IPF, because Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, these countries are included in IPEF. And the another big thing that happened in the first ever trilateral summit is that the trade pillar, the first partnership of global infrastructure investment that was launched, the Luzon Economic Corridor in the Philippines. So that was a trade pillar that was neglected like that since a while. It has been taking off with this Luzon Corridor. So these are the some steps that these countries have been taking. But again, like the Thailand and Vietnam, they are very cautious. And although they want the multi-engagement, like in the Thailand, when we talk about the Thailand as a US partner, as a long-term partner, also have the good relationship with Japan, partnership with Japan and India. And so as the Vietnam that Stephen mentioned, that whatever the in the Vietnam case. And what I think that in my analysis that the countries who have the border, who has a land border, who has a border with the China, adjacent border with the China, like India, they don't want to take any risk because, as we know, that China is powerful than any Asian countries, and of course militarily in comparative to India too. So like they all are following the balancing act, but again, what I mentioned earlier, having said that, were what we were looking in 2021, or what we were watching in 2021, is a bit different. Like in 2024, India's foreign minister recently visited the Philippines and supported the Philippines' stand in the South China Sea. So these are some kind of engagement where every time we see the China's retaliation, whatever is there. If India's foreign minister is speaking in Philippines, then again, and if there was a first trilateral summit here in the Washington, there was again, it makes China angry, and there is some kind of retaliation comes from there. And now let me take the one interesting step here with the Cambodia. So recently, the Golden Dragon exercise started. That Cambodia and China started the military exercise. So, like while looking at the Cambodia has a new leader, Hun Manet, as the son of the former president. So I guess these countries are not again leaving the China, and they very well know that China is powerful. China is their a strong neighbor. They don't want to take any risk, and again, they want their economic prosperity, the progress, the economic advancement. Want to take all the benefit of digital technology benefits. So again, partnering with the US as much as they can. In the same as in the Singapore case, I guess
Yeah, no, I think I understand. So what I'm gathering is essentially going back to Stephen's point around complexity, that it's not possible to say that the countries are only balancing or only hedging, that each of these countries are doing multiple things at once. So they're balancing, they're hedging, they're bandwagoning, they're dealing with economic dimensions of China, because China is in the region and very much present and the biggest trading partner of all of these economies. But at the same time, they need the security umbrella from the US. And at the same time, they're also very keen, as Stephen mentioned, to bring in other players, Japan, Australia, and even increasingly India, which is a bit of a latecomer, I guess. And that's what I've also taken away from your volume, that while India has had its Look East strategy, which has now become Act East strategy, it's still not as much of an actor as, let's say, Japan, US, or China and others, but increasingly playing a role. Stephen, if I could kind of bring you in to talk a little bit about precisely this issue of China-US, and also given that the US has historically been the security provider, but there's increasing demand for the US to engage economically as well. I mean, there was IPAF, which is better than nothing, but I think a lot of the countries in the region felt that it may not be enough. What's your sense of kind of how much lack of a really robust economic framework on the part of the US is hindering US's ability to engage with the region? Or is that sort of kind of now baked in and we don't expect it to change, so therefore it's not a huge issue?
So I think the broader regional integration project is now in deep trouble. And I think this is not just because of the United States rejecting the TPP, but also China has engaged in its own economic security initiatives through the BRI. And I think that should be very clear that China is also trying to restructure the region's economy in a way that it moves its economy towards the West, and that it links the South Central Asian states and South Asia and Southeast Asia through the BRI to create alternative trade partners and trade dependencies within the region. And as a result, it becomes less dependent on the United States and Western markets. United States as well has looked at trade and said, Trade is not the way we're going to move forward. We have to, reshore. We have to create a North American hub, and that's what we're seeing, right, with the United States at the center. We're going to see more manufacturing in the United States, more focus on economic security as the U.S.-China competition plays out. Now, the question is where do countries like those in Southeast Asia, how do they fit within this puzzle? And I think that, again, it's complex and it's heterogeneous. And I think what we're going to see is a mix of strategies in Southeast Asia. Those that are already aligned with China, like Cambodia, Laos, are going to probably be more committed to BRI initiatives. At the same time, they're not going to eschew other initiatives that I think like Japan and other countries are launching in terms of infrastructure and connectivity projects, but it's going to be the weight. And then countries like Vietnam, likely the Philippines, Indonesia, they're going to try to balance and negotiate this bifurcation of regional integration and try to get benefits from both. And then that's basically what my chapter focuses on in terms of these countries are looking at the BRI and FOIP initiatives as opportunities to, again, create more strategic autonomy. The question is the balance of how much they pull into the region. I think they would like more US, they would like a trade deal, but I think that that's very hopeful. Whether it's Mr. Biden being elected or Mr. Trump being elected in November, I see no trade deal on the table. Again, the logic of trade has changed. And this is related to, I think, broader interpretations or long-term interpretations of how the WTO initially was great for the world and great for the global economy, but the size of China warped how trade works. And no longer do markets are markets the kind of the basis for how we think about trade. It's size. And a country like China with 1.4 billion people, it's the center of the global production network, different regulations. And a real tilt towards Marxist-Leninist management of its economy means that it's not a market economy anymore. It's an economy that's led by the state and state-owned enterprises. And if that is the case, then we are going to need to find a new strategy to compete directly and secure our economic security. And it may not be those traditional market forces that have propelled growth in the post-World War II period. I think that we're already seeing industrial policy being adopted in many countries, including the United States. And that means focusing on trade partnerships that are much more equal. And I think that a trade partnership with Southeast Asia will likely be a partnership that has an unbalance or imbalance in imports and exports between the United States and Southeast Asia.
That's really interesting. I wanted to remind our audience that we can take questions from you as well. So please put them in the chat and we can pick them up as we progress. But on that point, Stephen, the trade is in fact changing. And obviously the region, Southeast Asia, has really benefited tremendously from globalization and global integration, if you will. And any kind of moves towards decoupling may have significantly disproportionate negative impact in that region than elsewhere. On the other hand, we're also seeing that some countries, notably Malaysia, are currently benefiting from sort of the de-risking that is happening, right? Like now, especially in the tech sector. Could you speak a little bit in terms of kind of how you see that trajectory, sort of where is that point where for the moment, obviously, there's some positioning and the de-risking is benefiting some, not others, maybe Vietnam, Malaysia are doing better. But obviously, if Mr. Trump does come into the office and there's an acceleration of this trend and a greater move towards decoupling, what would be the impact and what's the reaction on the ground to this?
Yeah, this is a complex question. So I don't like the word decoupling. I think the word should be like selective diversification, but it's not 100% cutting off from the Chinese market. But we should be very clear. Increased prices in China as its comparative advantages drop is one of the drivers of moving supply chains to Southeast Asia or South Asia to other regions. Second is the COVID-19 pandemic and the experience that the government can make arbitrary decisions that fundamentally disrupt supply chains. So policy choices. And third, geopolitics. So there's three drivers. And guess what? It's even affecting Chinese businesses. And I hate to quote Carlo Dade from Canada West Foundation, but I am going to. But
he's a good friend of ours as well. So please quote Carlo all you want.
I will. But as he says, you know, you run away from China, you're going to run back into China. And I think, again, this is a tip for Canadian businesses that they're still going to have to work with Canadian suppliers in Southeast Asia. So as we think about de-risking or decoupling or a selective diversification, what we're seeing is Chinese businesses also moving into Southeast Asia and other locations. Some countries like Vietnam or Malaysia, as you mentioned, are picking up some of the advantages of the supply chain diversification. And we're seeing new partners emerge. We're also seeing older partners also move into that region, and we still have to work with them. So I think this is actually a really interesting phenomenon to be watching. And it means that there's not going to be 100% decoupling, rather that we're going to be working with the same partners in Southeast Asia. The problem in Southeast Asia is they don't have the critical mass of labor like China had, or the established 40 years of logistics that were made with ODA from Japan and other countries. So it's going to take them some time to get online. But as we think about trade trends within the region, trade trends are no longer concentrating supply chains and production networks in one region. They're actually diversifying. The view is, and I'm going to just use Japan as an example, but South Korea is also on the same page, is that we're going to build closer to centers of consumption. So Southeast Asia is one area of consumption, South Asia, India is another area of consumption, and frankly, I see Central Europe as another area of consumption moving forward. So we're going to see these supply chains have new hubs, and that new hubs build resilience into the global supply chain network. But where things are going to be made are going to be more for a regional market. So that means that Canadians need to position themselves with an understanding that the supply chains that are going to be, let's say, located in Southeast Asia are going to primarily supply Southeast Asian consumers. So if we want to insert ourselves into the region, we have to understand that that's not for global export or export back to the US. It's going to be for that market in Southeast Asia, same in India, same in Europe. At least that's how I understand these changing dynamics of supply.
No, that's great, Stephen. And actually, just to pick up on that final point you made, that if Canada wants to insert itself into the region, as you know, Southeast Asia is a big part of focus in our Indo-Pacific strategy for Canada. It's kind of the strategic bet is to do more in Southeast Asia. We've seen a number of trade missions that have gone in, more to come later this year into Philippines and Indonesia as well. What would be, I mean, when you've begun to give advice on this, but what would be your take or your view on how that's going, particularly the kind of the trade and investment pillar of the Indo-Pacific strategy, if you will, and whether or not that approach is the right one for the region, and what's the reaction so far?
So I think much of the region has moved away from a purely focus on trade and investment to a focus on what they call economic security and resilience. And I think that we've had many trade missions to the region, and these are important for establishing our credibility as a member that wants a member of the community that wants to engage in trade. But this region is really concerned about not only boosting trade, but ensuring trade continues and investment continues. This is idea of economic security. So they're not only looking to buy Canadian things, but they want Canada to offer something to the region. So that part of the economic security model could be energy security. And what I mean here is getting the energy that Canada has a lot of into the region and being that sustainable, reliable partner. Same with critical minerals. A lot of the electronics that Canada uses, but a lot of the electronics that the region produces needs critical minerals. And again, Canada has a critical mineral superpower, needs to get those resources into the region so that it can add value to the region, not just sell Canadian products. And I can't tell you how important that is that the trade equation is not just about selling. It's focused on this idea of economic security and resilience. And this region was dramatically affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that it's embedded a new reality of how the region understands the importance of, again, resilient supply chains, resilient trade relationships, and having resilient and sustainable and steady energy and critical mineral supplies to keep prices down, to keep markets open, and to produce the kinds of things that the region produces for global and regional export.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really important point, that we need to move away from the old-fashioned sort of idea of trade and focusing on trade and economics, but really looking much more strategically and certainly at economic security. And for Canada to play into its strength, I mean, you mentioned energy security, critical minerals. One other thing that comes in, and into, I'm happy to bring you into this as well, is conversations around environment and climate change and environmental security, and to what extent, obviously, the region worries, cares about that. A lot of the focus of your volume is on the great power competition and the US, China, and the threats of that. But there's also the existential threat of climate, which is really important in the region. So if you could speak a little bit to that from the perspective of the countries that you looked at, that would be helpful. Either one of you, and if you want to come in on that, or Stephen.
Am I, yeah. It's, am I muted? And now it's better. So yeah, that's what basically we focus on the geopolitical aspect. But again, that the yesterday itself there was an Indo-Pacific Business Forum, that a meeting, the sixth meeting that was co-hosted by United States and Japan, United States and Philippines, and there was a I would say that it was a very a big projects and developers, the government officials, the CEOs that participated not only from the Southeast Asian countries to bring this the climate and the clean energy that we have in the IPEF, that we have one pillar, Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, that we have one pillar on the clean energy and decarbonization on that. So that the big Export-Import Bank from the United States and their vice president and their senior advisors. So they have participated in that Indo-Pacific Business Forum, and that is looking at the Philippines as a logistic hub, and for all these, and I would say that it's not only for the Southeast Asian countries, because IPEF consists of more countries from the Indo-Pacific. Basically, they have the 14 countries, like and what are the new partners with the US and in this open and very and prosperous Indo-Pacific, like Bangladesh, India, and India's business houses like Indian Chambers of Commerce and Tata Sons, and maybe I want to name a few who attended this forum and
Right.
bring these initiatives that how we can cooperate in the energy transition. So that's also like you touched a very good point here about the environmental security, that the U.S. investment through the USAID efforts in the region and in the not in the Southeast Asian countries, but the entire Indo-Pacific region. It's very boosting the initiative of decarbonization and the clean environment, and the countries have been participating in with their private and public partnerships. So this is a very high time that U.S. the led Indo-Pacific Economic Forum for Prosperity is taking a step ahead with all these four pillars, that and where we have one on the climate or the clean energy transitions, the loan agreements, and strengthening the high quality and resilience uh, uh, digital technologies. All this is going the agro business. We say that that is also as a process of the energy transition, agro business, and they have been working on several projects, and maybe the small and medium enterprises, through the small and medium enterprises. I got a opportunity to talk with the US AID administrator for the South Asian region, and they have been investing huge, not only with the State Department, but also again with the USAID, and not the US only, but again the European countries are also, they have their projects and going on these affordable green energy and energy transition green, in the agro food business. So I guess that there's a lot of efforts that has been putting in this Indo-Pacific, and yes, finally, I would like to mention that point to counterweight that the China's mm, uh, China's influence in the region. That what I mentioned in my first remark, that reliable and offshore partners and the credible partner. But we see the difference. But with these countries, maybe in the South Asia and the Southeast Asian countries, they see the difference between the China and between the United States. So their credibility, the reliability, again, there can be the leadership change, but not those basic policies, not that investment is going on. But again, if like Stephen mentioned about the leadership change in the United States, maybe there can be some slow down the process, and we can't say anything at this point. But again, like you also talked about the India's Act East policy. So India is also not on the military aspect, but looking at the non-military aspect, like the environment and the climate, is looking towards the Southeast Asian region. As we know that India's northeastern part is connected to the Southeast Asia region. And basically, if you can say that Northeast India is the gateway of the wider Indo-Pacific. So what I see at this time, that like the civil nuclear and modular reactors industry, that working groups. So there are different kind of working groups that have been initiated through this Indo-Pacific business forums, and there are several nuclear power projects, and that will be there will be the cooperation between the US and the partners and the allies in this like-minded partners. So yeah, there is a lot of progress that, but again, we come to that point, is to counter the China's influence is not for those countries who have their borders and who have their immediate neighbors. So they have to tread their path with the balancing act. But while we were talking this, I would like to highlight the one other point where, when we were talking about the decoupling. Yeah, of course, there's not a decoupling, but somehow diminishing, but somehow uh, uh, preventing the Chinese unethical practices in the trade. Like recently, US put the tariffs on the $17 billion tariffs on Chinese items to prevent the cheap items and goods in the US market. So what it is, and the China retaliated with it. So again, what comes is that when there is a sanctions and tariffs over there, so what it means, that there will be the opportunity for the local local retailers and all the workers, and of course in the Southeast Asian countries too. So they have the talent and skill in that. Uh, uh, if we see that, so they can take that leverage of these things to diversify the supply chain and of course the value chain, I would say that. And I will stop here.
Thanks very much, Indu. We have a few questions from the audience, so I'm going to go to them now. One is on South Korea's engagement with Southeast Asia, that we've spoken about a number of others already: Japan, India, Canada. Stephen, maybe I'll come to you on that in terms of how do you see South Korea engaging? I mean, I know long-standing partnerships, but also its own policies on the Indo-Pacific, which South Korea has, as well as the idea of becoming a regional pivotal state. Maybe you could speak a bit to that.
So that's an important question, and South Korea actually under the Moon administration adopted something called southbound policy, basically in response to some of the economic coercion it experienced after the installation of the THAAD missile system. So there's been a realization that it needs to diversify its economic partners. With that, the government's provided some support, and I think that it's been able to have been sustained over administrations, which is unusual in the South Korean context. Second, I think importantly, the South Koreans have come to an understanding that they have a real challenge in the region. Japan, they're no longer a direct competitor with Japan and many products. Japan's moved into a lot of sophisticated products. South Korea's picked up the televisions and the phones and the computers, but there's the Chinese coming back really, really quick. They're coming quickly. You know, the Samsung phone and the Huawei phone, the Xiaomi phone, there's not much difference, which means that the Chinese are going to probably compete directly with the South Korean products, and they're going to compete at a cheaper price. So South Korea really has to be thinking about how it can diversify partners, and that means Southeast Asia, that means India, and we're seeing growing interest in not only expanding, you know, Samsung and the other big companies in Southeast Asia in terms of technology, but also small and medium-sized enterprises. And whether you travel to Philippines or Indonesia or Vietnam or Cambodia, there's a growing small and medium-sized South Korean presence. So they're interested in the region. It's small-scale trade, but I think it's an important step that they're engaging. They're also engaging in infrastructure cooperation, and we also see South Korea engaged in some diplomatic overtures with India and Southeast Asia. So it's a scale issue, but again, there seems to be support that South Korea needs to do something different. And that difference is, again, pivoting to Southeast Asia and South Asia in a way to try and diversify its economy away from its current over-reliance on the Chinese economy. And again, this is a broader action within the region is how do we secure strategic autonomy? And smaller countries need to do that when they live by bigger countries.
Absolutely. Thank you. We have different types of questions. So we're kind of moving from South Korea now to the impact of the Middle East and the war in Gaza in particular. And what does that do, especially on the U.S. reputation, potentially with respect to the Muslim majority countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei. Any thoughts on that, either one of you, or maybe Stephen, like to what extent there has been an impact on that in the region, to what extent that factors into the engagement, certainly for Western countries with the region?
So I think it speaks to the heterogeneity issue. The region doesn't look at what's happening in the Middle East in the same way. I think they all see it as a tragedy, quite frankly. But the Muslim majority countries that you mentioned, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, perhaps the southern part of Thailand, look to this and the West's and US and Japan's response. And they're looking for a real leadership, and they want to see countries move away from a hypocritical approach to the region to something that's much more consistent. And I think what we're going to see some policy linkages where if the West, the US, and other countries, Canada, are wanting to engage with Indonesia, Malaysia, they're likely going to ask for a quid pro quo on issues related to the tragedy that's happening in the Middle East. And this is something that we're going to have to think about. How do we make these two ends meet? And it's an extremely, extremely complex problem. If your audience hasn't read it, the president of Indonesia wrote a really interesting op-ed in The Economist, I think last week, and he touched upon this issue. You know, it's hypocritical for us not to be supporting the Palestinians when we support the Ukrainians. And I think both are really important. But I think that Canada in particular, as a Canadian, we're going to have to really understand that there's going to be some policy linkages moving forward. And it's going to make the decisions in Ottawa even more complex as we pour more resources into the Indo-Pacific to try and create a credible, sustained policy.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right, Stephen, that there are linkages. We saw that with the war in Ukraine as well, right, which had quite a bit of an economic and food security impact in the region. We have another question with respect to South China Sea and the tensions between China and Philippines and the approach that Philippines has taken, obviously, around transparency and being much more vocal about what the aggressive behavior of China, and to what extent there's a limit to what ASEAN can do as a united block on this, given the differences of view and certainly the way Malaysia, Indonesia, and others are approaching this. So, I mean, I think the audience probably wants to know more sort of like, where is that really heading, and to what extent that's testing ASEAN, the position that Philippines has taken with respect to the dispute on South China Sea.
You want me to go first?
Sure. Yeah, either one of you.
First, I would like to go to the last question that you mentioned about the Israel and Palestine conflict. So, because just I read yesterday that being the Muslim majority country, the Malaysia is said that it is reported that Malaysia is helping the Iranian oil shipments and helping the helping the Palestinian. They are like the Hamas, of course, not the but in the Israel guard, and the U.S. has. U.S. said that they will investigate it. So basically, when it comes to the Muslim majority countries, again, if we sometimes I talk with my Bangladeshi friends. So when it comes to the Muslim majority countries, they we find that they are supporting the Palestine or Palestinian cause. But again, there is a Hamas. So same in the Southeast Asian, they have a different perspective. Like in the South Asia, we have the different perspectives to the war, and recently have the ICCs that accuses both Hamas and the Benjamin Netanyahu. So U.S. condemned them, and today it was a hearing of Secretary Blinken to the Foreign Affairs Committee, and he totally said that it's a ridiculous, like U.S. condemned the ICC's stance to like compare both of them at the same level. So these are the kind of some other issues that when we talk about the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, like the recently President Putin visited China, and there was a much of the noise. Okay, what is the implication for the Indo-Pacific, and what are the South Asian countries? So in the same way that the Taiwan's new president sworn in, I guess yesterday, and the China started the military exercises there. As again, when we talk about this in the Taiwan Strait relation with the Southeast Asian countries, I guess they want to, due to their want to stay not that want to directly involve in this Taiwan. They know the complexity of the tension where with the China and Taiwan. But the Taiwanese stand is that has been evolving since the last administration. So these are something that the point when we see the West Philippines Sea, that what was the Philippines vessels they have the frequent encounter with the Chinese vessels. So where we see these complexity, but again the Southeast Asian countries, they are just taking their own stand, and they are just not talking about the others, like for the Philippines side. Like I said, that Indian Foreign Minister explicitly said that okay, India stands with the Philippine sovereignty in the West Philippine Sea, but at the same time they don't say about the Taiwan state at this point. So these are some issues that again have the diverse perspective and the different, but Southeast Asian countries, they want to grow their relationship with Taiwan, like in the semiconductor and in the trade relations, like as the other South Asian countries too. So without this geopolitical tension, countries are interested to make their relations, to grow their relations with the Taiwan.
Great.
That's my take.
Thanks so much. Stephen, I don't know if you want to come in on the South China Sea Philippine question and sort of what that means for ASEAN and ASEAN unity, or?
I guess 3 small points. I think that the focus on the Philippines and the emerging minilateral relationships really, I think, shows that Washington's mentality is really, being built on, I think, Elbridge Colby's book of The Strategy of Denial, and looking at the Philippines as the bulk word that we need to invest resources there. And I think that this is good for the Philippines. If it works, it's not so good if it doesn't. That's my first point. If you want to understand why they're doing it and why investing in minilaterals. Two, it's in the interest of all the other claimants, the non-China claimants in the South China Sea, that the Philippines does this and it's successful, but they don't support it directly. If the Philippines,
or not publicly, but behind the scenes, yes.
yeah, so the Philippines is successful working with U.S. and Japan through this strategy of denial approach. It's good for all the claimants except for China. But if it doesn't succeed, then they don't have to take any responsibility. Three, I think it really shows that the minilateral approach to dealing with problems within the region is going to continue to cascade into new minilateral relationships that's going to embed in the region more formulas of cooperation that's going to bring some public good to the region and help deal with problems within the region that will create, I think, a broader lattice work of communication and problem solving that I think will bring some public good to the region. And it may not solve the South China Sea problems, but it's going to create a little bit more cohesion between the stakeholders. And I think these are three important take-homes when looking at this question.
I think that's great. And since you mentioned all these minilaterals and the fact that there are probably going to be much more of them than we see sitting here in Canada, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the fact that Canada is not party to any of these minilaterals, and sort of what's your sense of possibilities? I mean, you mentioned Philippines, obviously a country with which Canada is deepening partnership, kind of full spectrum partnership appetite on both sides. I think there's obviously a desire to do more with Japan, with South Korea, possibly Indonesia. Do you see a kind of a trilateral or another kind of quad where Canada can have a seat at the table, or what's your sense of that?
So I guess we need some creative thinking here, and I think Canada can. We must be very clear. Our closest and most important partner is the United States. Absolutely, and that will not change. And we share values, culture, institutions. But sometimes it's better to just work in a different partnership to establish our own credibility. And in that sense, I think that Canada can do itself a favor by, let's say, working with the Philippines, maybe Vietnam, maybe Indonesia in terms of dark vessel cooperation. Dark vessel
dark vessel detentions. Yeah.
Or maybe work with Australia, Japan, and Philippines on the dark vessel or illegal, unregulated fishing. I'm not saying we don't want to work with the United States. I think that we want to create new formulas of cooperation where we can add a specific value. And those two areas are important. I think another area that we have underdeveloped is looking at disinformation and cyber cooperation. And here I'm advocating at like two levels. The first level is maybe working with South Korea, Japan, let's say the Philippines on this, but we could also create a consortium of research institutes or universities that is working at this at the non-state level, so we can include Taiwan and ensure that we're abiding by our one China policy in a way that doesn't put Taiwanese at danger. And I say this because the Taiwanese are in the forefront of disinformation in terms of combating it and mitigating it and finding ways to push back against it. So I think that these are some interesting formulas for minilateral cooperation, and it does require some creativity, but it doesn't mean that we can't do it. And I think, again, we can create a little bit more legitimacy by not working with the United States on these areas, and working with the United States in other areas.
Absolutely. No, that makes perfect sense. And you're mentioning some areas in which we do have something to offer. So certainly on maritime domain awareness, dark vessel detection, and stuff around disinformation, cybersecurity. I think those are all interesting. And there's some early signs of that work with Philippines, as you mentioned, but also appetite on the part of Vietnam and Indonesia and others. I know I can spend a lot more time asking questions, and there's a lot of interest in your work and in this book. It's very timely. I think many people are looking at the Indo-Pacific, and within that, everybody's looking at Southeast Asia. So a volume that has contributions from the region, from authors from the region, that offers the view of the region and how it's looking into growing competition, I think is really timely and valuable. Maybe as a final question, kind of asking both of you, what will happen next? I know there's probably a lot of chapters that you weren't able to include in this volume. I'm encouraging everyone to purchase this book, which is available through the Nova Science publishers, and you have the link to that in the chat. Maybe you can give us a preview of what comes next.
Boss, what do you think?
Yeah, hopefully then there's volume 2.
Yeah,
Stacey?
so I was expecting a volume 2. So what are the things that you're currently looking at, the kind of cutting edge research and questions with respect to Southeast Asia geopolitics?
Yeah, actually, let me please allow me to start with this. Because we were just thinking that in this volume to add the Myanmar. So because the Myanmar is a default case in this Indo-Pacific, and of course, somehow I find the Myanmar is very as a location is very strategically location, like having border with the South Asia and the bridge between South Asia and Southeast Asia. So hopefully taking the chapter on Myanmar and one in Vietnam and Cambodia and one in Singapore. So basically these looking forward to the volume 2 for the with the remaining chapter and maybe some more development that has been coming in with the Indo-Pacific.
Absolutely. No, the case of Myanmar would be really interesting. And of course, as you said, strategically located. A lot is happening now. There might be some breakthroughs after the deadlock post the coup. So I think, yeah, absolutely look at Myanmar would be really, really timely. Stephen, anything to add to what the boss said?
Yeah, I think the boss has a lot of great topics. Just if I can add, I think the idea of multi-alignment is an important topic that we need to be thinking about, and how we think about extra-regional partners. And India, of course, you just spoke with Kai and a few others yesterday in the Indian panel. India is a great example of multi-alignment. It's not really aligned on the Ukraine-Russian war, but it's aligned in other areas. So I think this is a theme that needs to be brought into the new volume. A new case of course, and I think an area that I'm personally interested in exploring is how are the structural trends in the region going to put some of the countries in an advantageous position and some in a more disadvantageous position. And what I mean is growing population, too many young people, not enough good jobs. I think the Southeast Asian economy is very mixed. And I think this will affect how it engages with extra-regional partners and how it negotiates the increasingly difficult US-China relationship. So there's a lot of areas and themes that we need to address, but I'm going to work with my boss to try and make sure that we do address some of these important issues to, again, add more value to how we think about Southeast Asia in the region. And again, going back to those ideas, heterogeneity, understanding how to read the Southeast Asian tea leaves, and then again, this idea of how they're always focusing on strategic autonomy.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the big takeaway is that it's important to understand the nuance and the complexity of the region as well, and not just sort of speak about it as ASEAN one block, that there's a lot of variety, heterogeneity, the word that you use, Stephen, that's really, really valuable. Well, thank you so much for putting this volume together. I think it's a tremendous contribution to deepening our understanding of the region, and we look forward to engaging with both of you, and I want to thank everyone who joined us for this. This was obviously recorded and on the record, so you will see the outcome of this panel discussion and a summary on our website, and I hope you'll engage with other discussions and panels that the Asia Pacific Foundation will be conducting on Southeast Asia as well as South Asia and broader Canadian engagement with the region. Thank you very much, and have a good evening and a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.